Heads up, you need to know what happens in the epilogues of Fazbear Frights before watching this video. The FNAF books have always been a touchy subject when it comes to lore analysis. When the Charlie trilogy released, people understood that it was set in a different timeline and we had to draw parallels between them and the games. When Fazbear Frights released years later, we assumed this was the same as well. Most people still assume this is the same today. However, some interesting things released after the Frights which made people question its canonicity. For starters, the Ultimate Guide to FNAF said that the box that Detective Larson had in his office was the remains of items left from Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, and the book makes it very clear that FNAF 6 is connected to the Stitch Wraith Singers. When Tales from the PizzaPlex was announced, people thought we finally had some unquestionable stories that were set in the game's timeline. However, there are Frights connections in the book. The first story, Frailty, is about one of Eleanor's victims, a major Fazbear Frights antagonist. Just like Sari in To Be Beautiful, her mistake was trusting Eleanor, who turned her into a robot that looks like a human through their necklace. The second story, Lally's Game, also strangely connects to the Fazbear Frights. In Epilogue 11, during Larson's battle with Eleanor, he finds himself in a cluttered dark attic with cardboard boxes and plastic tubs with the kind of stuff that nobody really needed, but that people had a hard time of letting go for some reason. There's also a large antique trunk in the room with Eleanor curled up inside. In Lally's Game, Selena and Cade move to a new house, with Cade bringing both their best stuff and keepsakes / memorabilia. I'm pretty sure a lot of your boxes are filled with photos and keepsakes from your childhood. When asked if he could store his keepsakes in something more modern than the ratty trunk, Cade says it's an antique. Larson visited a memory of the attic in Lally's Game. There's a connection. Two of the stories in Lally's Game connect to the Stitch Wraith Singers. The third takes place in the Mega PizzaPlex, with no Fazbear Frights connections. The epilogue is obviously in the game's timeline. This complicates the previous idea on the canonicity of this book. There are three options we can take. None of it is canon, the epilogues of each book are canon and the main stories aren't, or all of it is canon. While the second option would make sense, there is something wrong with this logic. In the second book of Tales from the PizzaPlex, Haps, we follow the story of the development of the indie games, something from the game's timeline. A main story is in the game's timeline in this book. Is it possible, based on the connection between FNAF 6 and the Stitch line, and this question of canonicity in the new line of books, that some of the Fazbear Fright stories, specifically the ones related to Eleanor, are canon? It would make sense with Scott's original Steam post on Fazbear Frights that some are directly connected to the games. It would also work with that poster in the alley of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator that shows what is clearly Heracles Hospital, if you read The Man in Room 1280, with the two gargoyles in the front. If this idea that the Stitch line is canon to the games, dubbed Stichlinegames, is true, some ideas would need to be explained, like how Afton can be Glitchtrap in the Afton amalgamation, the 6 MCI kids in Into the Pit, and more questions. I will try to answer these the best I can. Starting off, we need to look at The Man in Room 1280. In the story, Andrew is torturing William Afton with Ultimate Custom Night, and Eleanor is feeding off of William's pain, agony. In the background, during the story, a priest named Father Blythe takes him to a Fazbear Entertainment distribution center at his request. Once he arrives there, his organs internally explode and he vomits all over the room, and what was left of him falls onto the floor. Everything he threw up on is infected by him, and he takes over the fetch animatronic. However, he also would have had to infect leftover circuit boards and other parts at this distribution center. Andrew follows William through fetch. The fetch animatronic eventually gets put into the Stitch Wraith. There, Jake, Andrew, and William inhabit the Stitch Wraith with Larson investigating, and eventually, the Stitch Wraith falls into a pit and merges with all of the leftover trash nearby and becomes the Afton amalgamation. The Afton amalgamation was kept powerful by Eleanor, and once she left it, it became heavily weakened. It was then defeated by the puppet mask. Then the amalgamation is gone. However, Afton is still in the circuit boards, and is then used for Help Wanted, and we know the rest after that. Throughout the Stitch line, Eleanor is murdering a lot of people. In the ball pit, there are hundreds of balls, all filled with remnant from Eleanor's victims. This would have to mean that she killed at least a few hundred people across 30 different years to fill all of those ball pits. And this brings us to the second argument. When Oswald travels into that pit to witness the deaths of the MCI kids, he notices that there are 6 children in the safe room. This place wasn't exactly a one-to-one copy of the incident, and Oswald could change things that happened in it. Coins randomly appeared in his pocket when he was about to leave. It was all a trick by Eleanor, who tried to kill Oswald as the rabbit. There were 6 spirits in the safe room, but not all killed at the same time. Andrew was in the Fredbear suit, stuffed by William before the incident. I covered Andrew's death more in a previous video. This accounts for 6 spirits in that room. It could not be Charlie as the 6th kid, because she was killed at Fredbear's. It had to be Andrew. As for everyone seeing the bodies, that is simply not true. Everyone was in a panic, looking for their children that had gone missing, but no one had seen their bodies stuffed in a room off camera. In the comic version of the story, we see multiple parents running around, asking where their kids are, including Susie's father. If everyone had saw the bodies, they would not be asking this. As for the one you should not have killed, whether Stichlinegames is true or not, it's Andrew. Cassidy is a girl, this spirit isn't. They show the face of the spirit, and they talk about pronouns. It's not referring to Golden Freddy. William never killed Golden Freddy. It's also not the bite victim, because William never killed the bite victim. And the new kid, the protagonist, looks inside the Golden Freddy suit and sees Andrew. The one you should not have killed is Andrew. And finally, You're the Band. It is stated that someone saw the bodies of the missing children incident. This will go against it being in the timeline if taken out of context, but it perfectly works. The protagonist of this story is a young boy who puts on a Freddy mask that is possessed by the spirit of Gabriel. All of his knowledge of the incident comes from Gabriel. Sometimes the protagonist would act strange and start acting like Gabriel, where he talked about protecting the others. When he talked about the murders, he said, "I know, because I was there." It wasn't someone new that saw the bodies, it was Gabriel's spirit who saw the bodies of the other missing kids. That is how the protagonist knew. If you have any other Stichlinegames questions, I would be happy to answer them in the comments. Overall, I think that some of these stories being in the game's timeline will clear up a lot of loose ends and would make all of the Tales books in the game's timeline as well without causing more confusion. There isn't many problems with time placement in the Fazbear Frights stories, as most are between FNAF 6 and Help Wanted. That is all I have for today, and I will see you all on the flip side.